Okay, welcome to our fifth and definitely final video that reviews arguments on the topic of abortion. The previous video I called the fourth and final, but turns out that video went longer than I thought it would be. So this is going to be our final video. And if you haven't watched the previous videos, I encourage you to watch those because this one's going to be short. And if you just watch this one without the build up to it, this will seem like kind of a letdown. Might seem like a letdown even if you do watch those, but I really encourage you to watch the previous videos. So in previous videos, we have reviewed a lot: how to define abortion, question begging arguments about abortion, everyday arguments about abortion, philosophical arguments that abortion is wrong, and now we're finally on philosophical arguments that abortion tends to be not wrong, or that abortion is tends to be permissible, or that it's prima facie permissible, and the like. So this section will be fairly brief, and a lot of it really depends upon the previous discussion. So I hope you reviewed that. I'll also mention that as these videos have been made, some technical difficulties have creeped in. But I hope they're doing okay and serving their purposes. All right, so the first argument that could be given to think that abortion is typically not wrong, or it's often not wrong, is that the arguments that it is wrong are unsound. So basically, if you think like, well, I'm not finding a good reason to think that abortion is wrong, that itself seems to be a reason to think that abortion is not wrong. So, um, what you should think about this argument really depends upon your understanding of the other arguments. And if you think that, well, there doesn't seem to be a very good reason to think that abortion is wrong, you might think that this is a good argument to think that abortion is not wrong. All right. So, a second set of more positive arguments, positive reasons to think that abortion is not wrong or that it's prima facie not wrong, depends upon facts about early fetuses, say first trimester fetuses, and the fact that they're not conscious, they can't feel anything, they're not aware. And why is that? Well, they don't have developed brains, they don't have nervous systems, so on and so forth. So basically, there's nobody there yet in a conscious way that's aware of anything. So those seem to be the facts as are reported by the science that investigates these sorts of topics. And so from these facts, you might think that, well, that means that early fetuses aren't persons. And it also seems to mean that maybe they can't be harmed. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So why would you think that early fetuses aren't persons? Well, here we can go back to our discussion about what persons are. And you might think, well, look, I'm a person now. If I die, there won't be a person here. What will the change be? The individual right now, my consciousness will be gone. And if my consciousness is gone, then the person is gone. It's kind of like if you were in a coma. So you're hit by a truck, go into a coma, tragedy. Why is that? Well, if it's a permanent coma, your consciousness has ended. The thinking, feeling, being is there no more, even if your body is still alive. So you might think that, well, persons do seem to be psychological beings, they're minded beings, they're beings that are aware, have consciousness, feelings, something like that. And well, early fetuses aren't yet persons yet. And since they're not persons, I think it's okay to kill them. If something's not a person, totally not a person, a totally not conscious being that's never been conscious, well, it would be okay to kill them. Okay, so that's one thought, an argument from fetuses not being persons. A second idea is you could think that given what early fetuses are like, the facts about what they're like, they can't be harmed. And so even if they're killed, they're not harmed. And if you're not harming somebody, well, then it's okay to do something to them. Yeah. So why think that early fetuses aren't harmed when they're killed? Well, to see this reasoning, you have to think about what is it to harm somebody? And one common idea about harming somebody is to harm somebody is to make them worse off compared to how they were. So you could think about when you've been harmed, say you've been physically harmed, emotionally harmed, financially harmed, any way you've been harmed, you're made worse off compared to how you were. Now, apply this idea to a non-conscious, a pre-conscious fetus. that fetus, there's no way it is to be that fetus yet, because the fetus like isn't aware, it's not conscious, doesn't have any sort of feelings. And some people argue that if a being is like that, it can't really be made any worse off compared to how it was, because it's not like it was in a way that can be made any worse off from. So, given the facts about fetuses, or at least early fetuses, given the nature of harm, people might think that, well, given what they're like, they can't be harmed, and so abortion's okay. All right, a final positive argument to think that abortion is not wrong comes from the famous philosopher Judith Thompson, and she has a famous article in defense of abortion that's one of the most famous philosophy articles ever. And it's famous in part because she has very clever, uh, unique, creative examples to make interesting points and make us realize interesting things. So she argues that, or she observes this: people often argue, look, if fetuses are persons and if they have the right to life, then abortion is wrong. She says, well, not quite so fast, because we need to think about what's involved in having the right to life. So she has this famous example called the violinist case. And in the violinist case, the story is basically this: you wake up one day in the hospital and you've been hooked up to a famous violinist. The violinist is unconscious, and the violinist has a kidney problem, and they have found that you and only you have the right, like, blood type and biology to help the violinist. So the Society of Music Lovers has kidnapped you and plugged you into the violinist so that they can use your body to save the violinist's life. So that's the situation. And the question is this: there's what would you do? And many people would say, like, well, I would get out of there. I would unplug from the violinist. At that point, you could ask, like, well, but do you think it would be permissible for you to unplug? And many people would say, yes, it would be permissible for me to unplug. Now, of course, the violinist is a person. The violinist is a person with the right to life. But if you think it would be okay if you think it would be okay for you to unplug from the violinist, it seems like you think, well, the violinist doesn't have a right to my body. And basically, nobody has a right to anybody else's body. So what does this mean? It means that the right to life is not a right to somebody else's body. Like, even if you need somebody else's body to live for your life to continue, you do not have a right to their body unless they, like, explicitly, deliberately give it to you. So this idea has been argued, or has been used to argue that abortion is permissible because, well, you might think, plausibly, that a woman has done nothing to deliberately give the fetus the right to her body. And since she hasn't given the fetus the right to her body, and the right to life just kind of automatically doesn't come with the right to anybody else's body, that would mean fetuses don't have the right to the woman's body. And so, at least at present, if she says, sorry, I'm not going to let you use my body, you're going to have to go, um, that would be permissible. Or at the very least, it would not be violating the fetus's rights. So, there's a lot of discussion about this argument, and there are other cases that she has to reinforce the idea that the right to life is not the right to somebody else's body. Um, so you should check out the article. It's super famous. It's really clever, and yeah. So this is often sort of the foundation of what's called a bodily autonomy argument, and there are many details that you want to look at. All right. So like I said, this slide might be a little underwhelming, but it all really depends upon the previous discussion. So I hope you check that out. And again, all these arguments are reviewed in this Thinking Critically About Abortion book, which you can get for free at this URL. And I keep referring to this because you can review things in much more detail in print compared to off-the-cuff talk like this. So if you want to check out the details, you can check them out here. And this will take you directly to the primary sources of many of the arguments that I've talked about. All right, so as promised, these lectures would discuss a little bit about the law, and obviously the legal status of abortion is something that's very important to discuss at the moment. Many important things going on concerning that. And here's some quick thoughts. if an action isn't wrong, then it shouldn't be illegal. So this presentation has reviewed a number of arguments, and many of those arguments support the conclusion to think that, well, at least early abortions, which are most abortions, aren't morally wrong. And if that were true, well, then they certainly shouldn't be illegal. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also worthwhile to notice that even if an action is wrong, that doesn't automatically mean it should be illegal. Sadly, many of us do wrong things all the time, but many of these wrong things hopefully should not be crimes or shouldn't be illegal. So there's a general, pretty kind of harder question about, well, what exactly should be illegal? Because just because an action is wrong doesn't mean it should be illegal. And even if an action is really wrong, that doesn't automatically mean it should be illegal also. But the most important points here is that if the arguments support thinking that at least many abortions aren't morally wrong, then they certainly shouldn't be illegal. But even if some abortions are wrong, that in itself doesn't mean they should be illegal also. There's more to it. All right, so I also said I would say something about later abortions. And people often talk about abortion in general. It seems like that's not so smart. We can be very specific. And at the very least, most abortions affect early fetuses, first trimester fetuses, rather undeveloped fetuses. And something I have mentioned as being important is the development of consciousness and feeling. And according to the science on this, this doesn't develop until around perhaps mid-pregnancy, perhaps end of first trimester. But at the very least, it develops after when most abortions happen. So this is some important information that's relevant to evaluating many arguments about abortion. So it is possible that some rare later abortions could affect conscious and feeling fetuses. That's possible. But these appear to usually be done for medical reasons. You can try to look around and see the explanations for later abortions. And it appears that there's a lot of research that suggests this is done for medical reasons. So if there are any later abortions that are done for frivolous reasons, not medically justified reasons, should these be illegal? One thought about this is if you're going to make a law about something, it has to be like a workable and fair law. So one question is, how could you make a law that would really work, that would allow for medically justified abortions that are done later in pregnancy, but make any other abortions illegal? And trying to figure out whether that could actually work out is a good thing to investigate. All right, so this has all been just a start. There's so much more to discuss. There are many more arguments about abortion that we could discuss. I have only presented things in a really quick, rough sort of way. And let me just observe that there are other questions about the status of the debate that are distinct from evaluating arguments about the issues or arguments about abortion per se. So here are some of them. You can read them, but I'll just read them out loud. How many people know about these arguments that we've reviewed here? How many people care about them? Who is interested to be good in arguments? Who's likely to be interested in good arguments? Why or why not are some people interested in good arguments? Why are some people not interested in good arguments? What actually persuades people? What should persuade people? Philosophers and other people teach courses on these topics. You might be watching this video because you're in a course that addresses this topic. What kind of difference does this make to the world? What kind of differences should this make to the world? Why or why not do classes like this have influence? And finally, do good ethical arguments influence law and policy on ethical issues in general? Should it? If it shouldn't, why not? So, abortion is a particular issue. There are particular arguments about it, but there are general questions about the role of philosophers and critical thinking and analyzing ethical arguments that are relevant to everything else. Okay, I hope these videos were valuable, and thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please share them. I hope to hear from you. Thanks, bye.